Hi and welcome to another episode of ReaperTV. In today's video we're going to be checking out a part of Neutron, the new plugin suite from iZotope. Now I'm going to be using Neutron Advanced, which allows me to install and run each of the individual plugins as standalones as opposed to having to load the entire Neutron interface in. So for this video we're going to concentrate on the EQ plugin. Now whether you're using the standalone or whether you're using the entire suite, it makes no real difference. You can use these plugins independently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, show you what it does, what's on offer, and we're going to take a look at how good this plugin actually is. So if you're not aware of iZotope or iZotope Neutron, Neutron is a new plugin that gives you an EQ section, two compressors, an exciter, a transient shaper, and a limiter, all built into a nice looking, simple to use interface that hides a real powerhouse of great features. So we took a look at this in an overview on a different video, and I'll link that in the description below. So I recommend taking a look at that just so you can kind of get a refresh on exactly what's on offer with Neutron from iZotope. But in this video, we're going to concentrate on taking a look at the EQ plugin. Now, if you purchase iZotope, the standard version, then you can run all of those 5 different plugins inside the one interface, and you can turn them on and off and do everything you want in there and use all the different functionality. It's not crippled in any way. But if you buy the advanced version, it gives you one added benefit, and that's the fact that you can, instead of running the entire application, you can run each one of those individual components as their own effect. So you don't have to load the entire suite in just to run the EQ or to run one of the compressors or an exciter, for example. Or you can stack up and actually build up a lot more instances of those on an individual track or a bus. So there's a bit more flexibility there that obviously you need to decide if that's actually something you need in the way that you process your work. So anyway, let's take a look at the EQ section. I'm going to go into a project now that I've already been working on. So I'm just going to open that up. And you can see it's a standard project. All of my tracks have been recorded in there, and I'm now ready to go through and start my mixing process. So I'm going to go through and we're going to use some of the buses and we're going to try the EQ out and see exactly what it's like, what it offers us, and some of the power that's actually hidden underneath the bonnet, should we say. So I'm going to use the rhythm guitar section on this track. I'm going to solo that off, and as you can see, there's no instance of any kind of effect on there. I've got EQ, re-EQ on both the guitars, and I'm going to take those off. So I'm going to delete those from there. So we're starting with just the amp sims on those 2 particular guitar tracks. That's all we have now is 2 instances of the U530 from Mercurial. So because they're both the same guitar tones, they might be slightly different in the EQ section on the amps themselves, but they're basically going to give us the same kind of tone. I can just work directly on the master track for this, on the bus that I've got for my rhythm guitar section. So what I'm going to do is click, and I'm going to come down to the iZotope section, and you can see I can run Neutron. So you can see I've got the instance there, or underneath that now I've got the compressor, the equalizer, the exciter, and the transient shaper. The limiter is part of the Neutron suite, so you need to run that to have the benefit of using that. So like I say, I just want the equalizer, so I'm just going to literally choose that, and we're just going to come down. I'm going to go down to the guitar section. There's my rhythm guitars. So I'm going to drag that up, drop it on there, and it's going to load my instance of the EQ from Neutron in. So let's take a look at that. It's a very, very typical looking EQ section. Let's just move this over and go back into the mixer section a second. Okay, so you can see it's a very standard looking EQ. We've got our normal EQ section. You can see we've got 8 individual bands we can control ourselves. We've also got a high pass and low pass filter, and we've got some additional bands on there. We can choose the band shelf or proportional. We can use the gain, we can adjust the Q setting on there, what frequency is specifically being targeted. We can use it in passive mode, or we can use it in dynamic mode, and we can just choose whichever of those EQ nodes that we want on there to be either dynamic or to be passive. And you can see we can choose, if we enable dynamic mode, what are we going to do? We're going to compress it or expand it, and we can then adjust the threshold and so on there. You can also see we can run this in 0 latency mode, and we can bypass it if we want to. We've also got an option for masking, and I covered that briefly in a different video, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail later on in this video. You can see we've also got a range of presets, so should I expand that down, you can see we've got a whole range of options in there. So we can just quickly run any of those on there, and we say, for example, we want to make it sound like elevator speakers. Once we hit that, you can see the EQ is now applied to that and give that effect to us. We can just simply get rid of that by going back to default. That'll get rid of everything on there. So we can choose that if we want to, any of the EQ sections. We can also create our own, so we can just easily create an EQ that we want to apply over and over again to different tracks that might be as part of a CD or a project, and you want all the particular elements to sound the same. Then you can just save these out as your own presets. So that's a pretty cool thing you can do on there. You can also name this EQ section. So let's just change that to say Master Guitar Bass. So we know exactly what this one's for. So when we look at masking in the future, we can take a look at actually specifying which track we want to compare to the other track. So we know once we name them, it's going to make our EQing just a little bit easier. We want to sort of call those up and use them for different purposes. We can also come in and you can see we can change the way that we view things on this. We can see we can go into linear mode, we can go into log mode, flat log, piano roll. So that'll change the way that things will look. You can see we can easily come in and adjust any of these nodes. We can enable and disable additional nodes. We can easily grab these handles and just change the Q, the frequency range that's being affected. So very easy. Nothing that you're not kind of used to when you're working with a standard kind of EQ. They might operate slightly differently in the interface, but they're all going to do the same kind of thing. We've also got the option to learn, which will then intelligently go through and find natural places to apply EQing based upon the audio that's being passed through the equalizer section. So we'll try that out. Let's just see what this actually thinks we should do. So let's just run the guitar track, and once I've done that, I'm just going to simply let this go through, let it EQ it and see how it sounds, and then I'm going to go through and I'll manually EQ it to put it the way that I would EQ the guitar section. So let's just put all these back to where they were, reset everything, turn those additional ones off. That's fine. So let's go through and let's just set this up now to start learning and see what comes up with. Okay, so we're ready now to hit that learn mode and see what it comes back with. Now what it's going to do is it's going to go through, analyze the frequencies going through it, and then it's going to put those nodes in points where it thinks that we need to do some adjustment. Now in this particular standalone mode, it's not going to make those changes for us. It's just going to pinpoint where it thinks there are problems or things that could benefit the audio that's running through it. So let's try that now. Let's just hit play and we'll switch on the learn option as we go through. Okay, so as you can see, it's gone through and it's pinpointed some of the areas that it thinks there are frequency build-up or frequencies that it thinks need to be addressed. Now, if you EQ guitars on a regular basis, especially distorted guitars, you're going to find there are certain frequency ranges that you do tend to go through and you'll scoop those or you'll give them a little bit of a boost. Specifically around the 2 to 3K mark, right the way up to around the 4,000 or the 4K mark, because you tend to find that's where the fizz is in a lot of guitar tones. Where you've got then the areas down towards the lower end, you can see around the 100 Hertz, it's telling us we probably want to put a roll off in there. So if we enable this, for example, and we'll run the learn again, let's disable that one a second. Just run the learn again on there, you'll probably find it'll put the frequencies around the same range. So as you can see, it's pulled the roll off in there where we'd expect it to, around the 80 Hertz mark, making sure that we don't have any other sort of sub frequencies in there which a guitar doesn't need to inhabit. That's where your bass and your kick drum are all going to reside, so you want to keep your guitars out there primarily. So you can see it's given us a good starting point. So like I say, we've got fizzy areas around this 2.5K and this 4K mark, so I would generally come into that, put a little cut in there, a couple of dB. Don't want to go too broad in that, and I would do the same then around the 4K mark. Now this is me just taking what this says on board, but what I'll do next is I'll go through and I'll reverse this the way that I do it, which is to scoop it and look for those horrible fizzy frequencies and see how close this actually was to finding those in our audio signal. So let's try that now. But to be honest, I think that's pretty spot on. almost like exactly where I would pinpoint those frequencies to get rid of that horrible sound. You could hear when I A/B that, when I bypassed it, you could hear that horrible fizzy tone clearly standing out when you bypass it, and just making the small cuts to both of those has made a big difference. So it's pinpointed exactly where you'd expect that. So that's a good starting point. You can see, like I say, we've got the other frequencies which we could go through then, and we could start adjusting those. And I kind of like it. I think it's great. So let's just say, for example, we've got this particular frequency, this node. Now I can switch on, if I want to, into dynamic mode. So once we enable that, you can see we have the option to compress it or expand it. So how do we want it to deal with this frequency, which is great if you're sort of dealing with, let's say you've got a kick drum and a bass and you want one to sort of compress while the other one expands a little bit, then you can use those to trigger. And that's a great way of being able to sort of allow your kick drum to shine through or your bass frequency to shine through without making a permanent effect, where when that particular frequency is not being hit, that it's being cut all the time. So it's pretty cool. You can use the dynamic mode on there, and like I say, you can use that whichever way you think is the best way for you. You can even use this to a sidechain, and you can actually use Neutron to do the sidechaining, and that's something we'll look at in a little bit more detail in a future video. For now, we'll just leave that as is. We've also got the threshold. How many dBs do we want it to actually trigger? So in other words, how low does it need to go before it'll actually trigger that actual dynamic mode where there's compression or expanding it? So that's pretty cool as well. We can control that aspect of it. So let's just bring that down, and if we now click the track on, you're going to see that on the third node we're going to start to compress that when the threshold is hit, and that's going to start cutting that back by, in this example, 9.3 decibels. So let's just hit the play on there and just keep an eye on this, and you'll see the EQ, the compression being applied when it meets the threshold. So keep an eye on this meter, and then also take a look at the node 3 just so you can see this in action. So as you can see there, as I adjust the threshold, we either have more or less of that EQ being applied to it. So we sort of use this in a very similar fashion to use the threshold with a compressor. Is saying how much is actually being cut, at which point is it going to be cut. So you can increase or decrease the amount of compression or expansion being applied based upon the threshold that you use on there. So again, that's a pretty neat way of being able to deal with this. So as an EQ, I kind of like it. I think this is going to definitely become probably my go-to EQ, whether I use it in standalone mode or whether I use it as part of the actual Neutron suite. But what makes this even more powerful is the fact you can use this in masking mode. Now, I covered the masking mode in the original sort of my first impressions of Neutron, and what masking allows you to do is, again, if we go back to that example of a kick drum and a bass, we can specify, we can find out where build-ups of frequencies are, and we can counteract them. So what I'll do is I'm going to open up 2 instances of Neutron, one on my drum track and one on my bass track, and I'm going to show you this in action. So I've got an EQ now on both my Bassmaster and on my drum bus, and as you can see, I've got the drum bus open at the moment. I've used a preset on there just to give us a basic EQ, and if I just play that a second, you can listen to what the drums are on their own. So let's just have a listen to that. So there we go, there's our drum track. So what I want to do is, I want to make sure they don't have any clashing frequencies, and if I do, I want to be able to deal with them in an intelligent fashion, and that's exactly what the masking facility allows us to do when we're using the equalizer from Neutron. So if I click masking, that's going to bring up 2 EQ windows, and what I can do is I can choose what EQ I want to compare to the currently open instance of Neutron, in this example, my drum bus. So obviously I want to deal with the bass, but you can see I've got guitar 1, voice, master, guitar bus, and so on. So anytime I've got an instance of Neutron or Neutron equalizer, I can call that up and I can use it to compare to the existing EQ section that I have open in front of me. So I'm going to choose the bass. So now I've got the 2 frequency ranges, the 2 lots of EQ. So I'll solo those out so I'm not being sort of colored by guitars and things. And if I run that now, what that's going to do is in this top section, it's going to go through, it's going to compare the 2, and it's going to start looking for any frequency buildup, and it'll identify those with a chart. I can adjust the sensitivity of that, and I can also go through and I can inverse the link, which we'll take a look at in a moment. So if I start playing this now, we're going to see if I get any build up, and if I find nothing at all, then I'm going to start to increase the sensitivity to make sure that it's nothing there, or if it is, it might be lower down in the frequency or lower down the volume, but I need to identify it to deal with it. So let's have a look at that. So as you can see, there's quite a range of build-up, especially down in this area where you can see we've got quite large frequency build-up. Smaller areas in the sort of mid-range towards the higher end, which you kind of expect, which is probably where the cymbals and some of the higher clicky notes from the bass are coming in. But what we'll find is that when we have a clash in this sort of 40 to 100 hertz area, that's where our kick and our real low frequencies of our bass are sitting, and we'll find that if the 2 of those build up too much, we'll lose the punch and impact of both the kick and the bass, and we'll find they won't cut through to each other. So what we could do is we could easily find out where that build up is, and then we can start to add some additional points into this, or bring over any of the EQ points into the nodes, and we can adjust those, and we can do that on a manual basis, or we can use the inverse link option, which that will do is any point that is placed on this will be mirrored underneath. So any adjustments I make. So let's inverse that. So you see it makes no effect to the ones that are already existing unless I adjust those myself. So I'm going to run this again, and I'm just going to look for where those frequencies are, and I'm going to add another node in there, and I'm going to see if I can counteract that problem we have there. And you should find by doing this that the kick drum or the bass will start to stand out a little bit better. We can kind of control, we can boost the one and we can cut the other one, just to make sure that we've got that, you know, sort of that frequency response being dealt with. So let's do that again. So let's just run the track. Now you should be able to see, as I make these adjustments, you should find that in this example, the kick drum should stand a little bit more, and the bass should sort of drop back a bit. If we wanted to do it the opposite way around, we could easily just bring the kick, and we could drop that down, and you'll notice then that that automatically brings up the bass. Now the only thing that doesn't happen here is if I adjust the Q on these, they are independent of each other. Only the position and the actual amount of cut or boost is being reflected. So any kind of frequency adjustment where we expand the Q to make it broader or more specific to frequencies, that's independent. So you need to be aware of that when you are making these adjustments. But like I say, the left-right movement and the boost and cut are being mirror reflected. So let's have a little listen to that. So there we go. You can see that we can quite easily and visually see where we have problems. We can deal with them all inside this one interface. We can inverse link it to make the whole boosting and cutting frequency ranges that much easier, which for me is one of those things that I think this is worth the money alone just for that facility. It's brilliant. So that's why I'm going to wrap this video up on the Neutron equalizer. It's a very powerful, really easy to use EQ, and the inverse link and the masking option is worth the price alone just to make your whole mixing process so much easier. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up. I hope you found this useful. I hope it's given you an insight into what you could achieve by using Neutron and using the Neutron equalizer. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've got any questions, comments, or feedback on this video or anything else covered on the channel, please pop those in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and until next time, happy mixing.